Hello and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, the podcast where we talk about cybercrimes and cybersecurity news. This week we will be discussing a data breach for Ford that went from bad to anticlimactic. On November 17th, the hacking group Intel Broker claimed to have stolen customer data from the auto manufacturer Ford. This was on the hacking forum Breach Forums. The data they claimed to have was on 44,000 customers and included full names, physical addresses, and even some information on purchases. Most of the time when data is stolen in a breach like this, it's put up for sale and it goes to one buyer. Because typically when you buy a product, it's just for you. This is not what Intel Broker did, however. They were selling copies of the dataset to any registered Breach Forums member for around the equivalent of $2. For a comparison, typically data like this would be sold for hundreds or thousands of dollars, not $2. And there is some sort of reasoning for this. I find the strategy to be really interesting. Part of the value in selling the data to one person is that no one else has access to that data. Only one buyer can take advantage of this in their own malware or phishing campaigns, and these threat actors will pay a higher price for that kind of exclusivity. Why would you sell a database with such sensitive records to practically anyone who wants it for less than the price of a cup of coffee at Starbucks? I am actually kind of curious as to what their profit margin on this was. How many people bought this data? And I wonder if it was actually more beneficial to sell it in this way as opposed to selling it for more to a single customer. But, well, hackers don't usually publish their financial statements, so I'm not sure about that. You may have already been able to tell this is not exactly an ordinary data breach. 44,000 customers with their name, address, and purchase information seems bad. But are these customers people? That may seem like a dumb question, but the answer is no. They are not people. So what are the customers really then, if they aren't, well, people who buy Fords or go to the dealership to get their car serviced? Ford, of course, became aware of this breach and did an investigation, and they didn't find anything. No sign of compromise, at least not that they reported. Could this be an incredibly stealthy attacker that did a fantastic cleanup job and got entirely out of their environment after grabbing this dataset? It could be, but it's not. They claimed that the breach was actually a third-party supplier that was targeted, not Ford themselves. And not only that, the data was already publicly available. Because the customers were not customers, they were actually just Ford businesses. Dealerships. Yes, the hackers linked to the addresses of Ford dealerships, which you can do if you go to Google Maps. Technically, if you have a lot of time on your hands, or use some kind of tool to scrape that data. This was demonstrated in samples of the data just being the addresses of Ford dealerships. This is a highly accessible dataset, given that it's being sold to basically anyone who wants it for $2. You can go buy it yourself if you want. So it was pretty easy to check that this is indeed actually what the data was. If you're wondering whether there's more to this or not, I honestly do not really think so. It is possible this is some sort of publicity stunt that the attacker does, and they actually have information considered more sensitive that they'll be selling at a later time for whatever reason. However, this is not the first time something like this has happened with this threat actor. According to Security Week, Intel Broker has been known to greatly exaggerate their data breaches against high-profile companies similar to Ford. They hacked Nokia this year and leaked their source code, which would be a major blow to any software company. Except Nokia didn't really care, because it was the source code for some customized software that was only used by one customer network. And Nokia didn't actually even develop the code, so it didn't include any of their secrets. It was just a random outsourced third-party Nokia-related software. In the case of Ford, it seems that the Intel brokers bragged about compromising the network, which they don't appear to have actually done, and stealing sensitive information, which also isn't really true. Anything potentially sensitive doesn't actually involve the customers of Ford, just the dealerships themselves. Which is still not great if some of that information is supposed to be kept under secrets, but that's an entirely different problem than what Intel Broker had advertised. So the question is, why even bother with any of this at all? What's the point of greatly exaggerating claims about data breaches? In my opinion, it's a combination of publicity and fear-mongering. It's difficult for ransomware groups and other hacking groups to get notoriety and therefore recruit better hackers to do bigger hacks and get bigger money. Fluffing up your resume is something a lot of people do, and ransomware groups are not an exception either. This is certainly a weird case still, and I'm interested to see what ends up happening with Intel Broker in the future. Whoever is behind it clearly has some ability to hack organizations, but is that going to be enough to compete with the big ransomware groups? I'm not so sure. However, this will still likely damage the reputations of the organizations the group chooses to target. Most people don't read past headlines, and also don't trust corporations to keep their data safe. There's a lot of mistrust with how organizations handle data, even by lay people who don't really understand policies around data or what's even being collected. You'll see people all the time talking about how phones spy on you all the time, and that targeted advertisements are just a little bit too accurate, based on things they never actually Googled but just said out loud in some completely different conversation. I don't think these concerns are completely baseless either. It's possible that damaging the reputations of certain companies is part of some larger, longer-term plan. But for now, I'm unsure what that would be, besides just generally causing chaos, which sometimes is the plan. Thank you for tuning into this rather chaotic episode of Bite-Sized Cybercrime, and another thanks to Security Leak, Tech Radar, and Bleeping Computer for information on this data breach, and, well, whatever it actually happened to be. My name is Chloe Tonis. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and until next time, stay secure.